Millionaire dad mocked his childless black daughter for raising 4 homeless kids until they saved her from death row. Guilty on all counts. The gavel's echo felt like a death knell in Rachel Freeborn's chest as she gripped the defendant's table, her 4 two-year-old hands trembling against the cold mahogany. She was about to die, not in some distant future, but in 30 days, by lethal injection, for something she didn't do. Miss Freeborn, you have been found guilty of embezzlement, conspiracy to commit fraud, and first-degree murder. I hereby sentence you to death by lethal injection. The courtroom erupted. Rachel's knees buckled as the reality crashed over her like ice water. Death row. She would never again feel sunshine on her face. Never tend to the small garden she'd planted outside her modest apartment. Never watch children play in the park the way she once had with 4 scared boys who'd changed her life forever. This is a travesty. Her public defender's voice cut through the chaos, but Rachel barely heard him. The prosecutor, a sharp-faced woman who'd painted her as a cold-blooded killer who murdered her own father's business partner, was already packing her briefcase with satisfied efficiency. Behind her, Rachel heard her former neighbor, Mrs. Jane, sobbing. She didn't do this. Rachel wouldn't hurt a fly. But the jury hadn't believed her. 12 strangers had looked at a black woman accused of stealing $50 million from her white billionaire father's company and decided she was capable of murder. The evidence against her was overwhelming, they said. Her fingerprints on financial documents, her name on offshore accounts suddenly flush with money. Security footage that seemed to place her at the scene of the crime. All lies. All perfectly crafted lies. Before we get deep into today's story, please let me know in the comment where you're watching from. Hit subscribe if you're hooked in and ready to enjoy the story, because tomorrow I have another beautiful story to share with you, and I don't want you to miss it for anything. Once again, you're welcome to Mr. Paul Stories, where we weave our dreams and hearts together through the magic of stories. Now, let's begin today's story. As the bailiff approached with handcuffs, Rachel's mind drifted to a different time. 20 years ago, when 4 homeless white boys with nowhere to go had knocked on her door in the middle of the night. When being disowned by her millionaire father meant she still had her freedom. When choosing love over wealth felt like the most natural thing in the world. "Ma'am, I need you to stand and place your hands behind your back." The bailiff's voice was gentler than she expected. Even he seemed uncomfortable with this verdict. But justice was justice, and she was now a woman condemned to die. "Wait." The voice came from the back of the courtroom, deep, commanding, and achingly familiar. Heads turned as footsteps echoed against marble floors. Rachel twisted in her seat, squinting through her tears at the doors that had just burst open. A tall man in an expensive charcoal suit strode down the center aisle, his presence immediately shifting the room's energy. Behind him, 3 other men followed, one with the steady bearing of a surgeon, another with the sharp eyes of an analyst, and the last with the observant stillness of someone who made their living uncovering truth. The prosecutor looked annoyed. "Your Honor, the sentencing is complete. I don't know who these individuals are, but—" "We're her sons, Your Honor," the first man said, his voice carrying a slight tremor that only Rachel would recognize. "And we have evidence that will change everything." Rachel's heart stopped. Those eyes, that stubborn set to his jaw when he was determined about something. It couldn't be. "Francis?" The name escaped her lips in a whisper. The man's composure cracked just slightly. "Hey, Mom." The courtroom fell silent. The judge leaned forward, his expression shifting from stern authority to genuine confusion. "I'm sorry. Did you just call the defendant?" "She's our mother in every way that matters, Your Honor." The second man stepped forward, pulling a thick folder from his briefcase. "Dr. John Martinez, trauma surgeon at Chicago Memorial. This is my brother, Philip Thompson, senior financial analyst at Morrison & Associates. That's James Wilson, investigative journalist with the Chicago Tribune. And this," he gestured to the first man, is Francis Morrison, federal prosecutor for the Northern District. Rachel's hand flew to her mouth. Her boys, her 4 scared, skinny boys who used to crowd around her tiny kitchen table fighting over the last pancake. They stood before her now as successful men in expensive suits, but she could still see the frightened children they'd been. The prosecutor scoffed. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular. The defendant has already been sentenced." "The defendant was framed," Francis said, his attorney voice cutting through the room like a blade. "And we have proof. Hey friend, how are you feeling about this story so far? Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from, and if you've ever had to fight for someone you love when the whole world was against them. Some stories hit too close to home to share just on YouTube. I send those along with little life lessons and surprises to my email circle. If you'd like to be part of it, the link is in the description. Judge Harrison studied the 4 men with growing interest. In 30 years on the bench, he'd never seen anything like this. "Mr. Morrison, you're claiming to have evidence that wasn't presented during trial. Evidence that was systematically hidden from the defense, Your Honor." Francis's voice caught slightly. "Evidence that proves my mother," he paused on the word, "is innocent. And more than that, evidence that reveals who really committed these crimes and why they framed her." Rachel felt the world spinning around her. This couldn't be real. Her boys, her precious boys who she hadn't seen in 15 years, who she'd thought had moved on with their lives and forgotten the poor woman who raised them, had walked back into her life at the exact moment she needed them most. Philip stepped forward, his quiet voice somehow commanding the room's attention. "Your Honor, we've spent the last 18 months investigating this case. What we found will shock this court." He paused for effect. "The real criminals are sitting in this room right now." A collective gasp rippled through the gallery. In the back row, partially hidden, Rachel saw her father, Jonathan Freeborn's face drain of color. James pulled out a tablet, his journalist's hands steady despite the emotion flickering in his eyes. "We have video evidence, financial forensic reports, and testimony from witnesses who were threatened into silence. Our mother didn't just raise 4 homeless boys, Your Honor. She saved 4 lives, and now it's our turn to save hers." The judge looked from the 4 men to Rachel, who sat in stunned silence, tears streaming down her face. These were her boys. The same boys who used to crawl into her bed during thunderstorms. The same boys who'd promised her they'd make something of themselves someday. The same boys she'd thought had forgotten her completely. "Your Honor," Francis continued, his voice gaining strength, "we request an immediate stay of execution pending the presentation of new evidence. Evidence that will not only exonerate our mother, but expose a conspiracy that goes deeper than anyone in this room could imagine." The prosecutor shot to her feet. "This is preposterous. The case is closed. These men can't just waltz in here." "Can't they?" Judge Harrison's voice cut through the protest. He studied Francis's determined face, then looked at Rachel, seeing her differently now. Not as a convicted killer, but as a woman who'd somehow raised 4 extraordinary men despite having nothing. "Mr. Morrison, you have exactly 10 minutes to convince me why I should delay this execution." Francis smiled the same crooked smile he'd had as a 12-year-old boy, asking for one more bedtime story. 10 minutes is all we need, Your Honor. 10 minutes to prove that the woman who saved our lives 20 years ago is being destroyed by the very people who should have protected her. As he opened his briefcase, Rachel caught sight of a photograph tucked inside the lid. It was old and faded, a picture of her and 4 young boys standing outside her tiny apartment, all of them grinning despite having so little. Despite the worn clothes and the uncertain future, and the father who'd disowned her for choosing them, she'd kept them safe then. Now, somehow, they were here to return the favor. But as Francis began to speak, Rachel noticed something that chilled her to the bone. In the back of the courtroom, partially hidden behind a marble pillar, stood a figure she recognized. Someone who shouldn't be there. Someone who was supposed to be dead, the very man she was convicted of murdering, the same man who'd started this nightmare 20 years ago, when her millionaire father first discovered she'd chosen 4 homeless boys over the $5 million trust fund. He'd offered her to focus on giving him real grandchildren. The past wasn't buried, after all. It had been waiting, and now it was coming for all of them. 20 years earlier, the pounding on Rachel Freeborn's apartment door came at 11:47 p.m. on a freezing December night. Desperate, insistent, terrified. Rachel had been awake anyway, had been for weeks since her father's Thanksgiving ultimatum still echoed in her mind. Choose those street urchins over this family, and you're dead to me. She'd made her choice. Now, she was living with it in a cramped one-bedroom apartment in the roughest part of Chicago. Surviving on her $28,000 a year social work salary and the $3,000 severance check her father had thrown at her like garbage. Please, somebody help us. Please. Young voices. Multiple. Crying. Rachel's heart hammered as she stumbled to the door, peering through the peephole. 4 white boys stood on her porch, soaked from freezing rain, shivering so hard their teeth chattered. The oldest couldn't have been more than 13. He clutched the hands of 3 younger ones, maybe 11, 9, and 7, like he was the only thing keeping them tethered to earth. They were filthy, bleeding, terrified. "Don't get involved," her survival instinct screamed. "You can barely feed yourself." But Rachel saw something in the oldest boy's eyes that broke her completely. The same look she'd seen in her own mirror at age 6, after her mother died and her father began disappearing into his grief and bitterness. The look of a child raising children, of someone too young carrying weight too heavy. She opened the door. "Lord, have mercy," Rachel whispered, taking in their torn clothes, their frightened eyes, the cut across the oldest boy's cheek that was still bleeding. "What happened to you, babies?" The oldest boy, tall, with dark eyes that had seen too much, stepped protectively in front of the younger 3. His voice shook but held steady. "I'm sorry to bother you, ma'am. We saw your light on. We don't have anywhere else to go." "Where are your parents?" His jaw clenched. "Dead. Car accident 2 years ago, and the people who were supposed to take care of us." He swallowed hard. "We can't ever go back there. Ever." Something in his voice, the flat, traumatized certainty, made Rachel's blood run cold. She'd heard that tone before. In support groups, in therapy sessions, in the broken voices of children who'd survived things that should never happen to anyone. "Come inside before you freeze to death," she said, stepping back. "I'll make hot chocolate." The youngest boy, 7, with blue eyes like winter sky, looked up at her with such desperate hope it physically hurt. "Are you going to call the police on us?" "Do you want me to call the police?" The middle boy, maybe 9, with gentle features and an old soul's sadness, shook his head frantically. "They won't believe us. They never believe kids like us. Nobody ever believes us. Kids like us." Rachel had been a kid like that once. The invisible kind, the expendable kind. In her tiny kitchen, she watched them huddle around her small table as she heated milk on the stove. They didn't touch anything without permission, sat up straight despite their exhaustion, whispered, "Please," and "Thank you," for everything. Someone had taught them manners, but someone else had taught them fear. "What are your names?" Rachel asked gently, stirring chocolate powder into steaming mugs. The oldest spoke first. "I'm Francis. This is John," he gestured to the 11-year-old. "Philip, the 9-year-old, and James, the youngest." "Francis, John, Philip, and James," Rachel repeated, setting mugs before them. "I'm Miss Rachel." Francis wrapped his hands around the mug like it was the most precious thing he'd ever held. "Miss Rachel, we won't stay long. Just need somewhere to rest for a few hours, then we'll go." "Go where?" The boys exchanged glances. It was John who finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "We were living with our Uncle Eddie after our parents died. But Uncle Eddie, his voice cracked. He had friends who came over. They said we could earn our keep, help pay for our food and clothes. Rachel's hands stilled on the spoon. No. Please God. No. What kind of work? Baby. Philip buried his face against Francis's shoulder. Francis's young face hardened into something no 12-year-old should ever have to wear. The kind that hurts, Miss Rachel. The kind that makes you want to stop existing. The spoon clattered from Rachel's hand. These babies, these precious, innocent babies had been... She couldn't even finish the thought. We ran tonight, Francis continued, his voice steady despite the nightmare behind his words. We've been planning it for 3 weeks. Saved $47 from the money they gave us. But Eddie's going to come looking. He said if we ever tried to leave, he'd hunt us down and make us sorry we were ever born. James started crying silently, tears sliding down his small face. He said nobody would believe us anyway, John added quietly, because we're just foster kids with dead parents and nowhere to go. He said we should be grateful he took us in at all. Rachel felt rage and grief warring in her chest. These were children. Children. And the system that was supposed to protect them had fed them to monsters. You're safe here, she heard herself saying, though she had no idea how she'd make that promise true. Nobody's going to hurt you while you're under my roof. Francis looked at her with those 2 old eyes. You can't promise that, Miss Rachel. You don't know what Eddie's capable of. Then he'll find out what I'm capable of, Rachel said, surprised by the steel in her own voice. For the first time since they'd arrived, Francis's face cracked, his chin trembled. Why would you help us? You don't even know us. Rachel knelt beside his chair, looking into the eyes of this child who'd been forced to become a man too soon. Because somebody should have helped me when I was your age, and nobody did. Because you're children, and you deserve to be safe. Because, her voice broke, because it's the right thing to do. James slid off his chair and wrapped his small arms around Rachel's neck. He smelled like rain and fear and unwashed little boy. I'm scared, he whispered against her shoulder. Rachel held him tight. This child she'd known for less than an hour, and felt something shift in her soul. Me too, baby, she whispered back. Me too. That night, after the boys finally fell asleep on her couch, all 4 of them tangled together like puppies seeking warmth. Rachel sat at her kitchen table and stared at her phone. She should call Child Protective Services. That was protocol. That was the law. But she knew the system, knew how easily 4 boys could be separated, sent to different homes, lost in bureaucracy, knew how often the system failed children who needed it most. Her phone buzzed. A text from her father's assistant. Margaret, your father is hosting Christmas gala next week. He asked me to confirm you won't be attending. Rachel looked at the text, looked at 4 sleeping boys who had nothing and no one. She'd already lost her father, her inheritance, her comfortable future. What was a little more sacrifice? She typed back, correct. I have a family to take care of now. Then she Googled, how to become a foster parent in Illinois. Outside, snow began to fall, and somewhere in the city, a man named Eddie was discovering 4 empty beds and calling in favors to find the boys who'd escaped. Rachel didn't know it yet, but that phone call would set in motion a chain of events that would end with her on death row 20 years later. But that night, she just held 4 scared boys and promised them tomorrow. And meant it. 3 weeks after taking in the boys, Rachel received a phone call that made her blood run cold. Rachel. Her father's voice was ice. Thanksgiving dinner at the estate. 4 o'clock. Non-negotiable. We need to discuss your situation. Situation. As if 4 traumatized children were a problem to be solved. Dad, I don't think... Margaret tells me you've been asking about foster certification. For 4 children. His voice dripped with disgust. We're going to settle this nonsense once and for all. Bring them if you must. Let me see what you've thrown your life away for. The line went dead. Rachel stared at her phone, heart pounding. She looked at the boys, Francis doing homework at the kitchen table, John helping Philip with math, James drawing pictures of their new family with crayons she'd bought at the dollar store. They'd gained weight in 3 weeks. Started smiling. Stopped flinching when she moved too quickly. "Who was that, Miss Rachel?" Francis asked. "Always protective, always watching." "My father. He wants to meet you boys." 4 pairs of eyes went wide with fear. "We don't have to go," John said quickly. "We can stay here." But Rachel knew her father. If she didn't show up, he'd show up here, and she needed to control this confrontation, not be ambushed by it. "We're going," she said firmly, "and we're going as a family." Thanksgiving Day. Jonathan Freeborn's mansion loomed like a monument to everything Rachel had walked away from. Marble columns, manicured gardens, a driveway that cost more than most people's houses. The boys pressed close to her as they walked to the door, wearing the best clothes she could afford from Goodwill. They looked terrified. "Remember," Rachel whispered, "you belong here just as much as anyone else. Hold your heads high." Francis squeezed her hand. At 13, he was already trying to be the man of their little family. "We've got your back, Miss Rachel." Margaret opened the door, her eyes red-rimmed. "Rachel, sweetheart, maybe this isn't—" "We're here, Margaret. No turning back now." Inside, the formal dining room was set for Thanksgiving. Crystal, china, silver, everything gleaming and perfect and cold. Jonathan stood at the head of the table in a tailored suit, his steel-grey hair immaculate. Beside him stood Vincent Sterling, her father's business partner, a man Rachel had never liked. Something about his smile never reached his eyes. Rachel. Her father's gaze swept over her thrift store dress, then landed on the boys with barely concealed contempt. "And guests. Dad, these are Francis, John, Philip, and James. Boys, this is my father, Mr. Freeborn." "Sir," Francis said politely, extending his hand. Jonathan stared at the outstretched hand like it was diseased. After a long, humiliating moment, he turned away. Rachel felt Francis's hand tremble as he lowered it. Rage bloomed in her chest. "Sit," Jonathan commanded. Dinner was torture. The boys sat ramrod straight, using perfect manners, barely touching the elaborate food. Jonathan ignored them completely, speaking only to Vincent about business deals and profit margins. Finally, over dessert, Jonathan set down his fork. "Rachel, what is this really about? Some quarter-life crisis? Trying to prove something to your dead mother?" The boys flinched. Rachel's hands clenched in her lap. "They needed help, Dad. They had nowhere to go. There are systems for that. Agencies, foster care. You're 22 years old, making poverty wages. How exactly do you plan to support 4 children? The same way Mom would have, with love and determination." Jonathan's face darkened. "Don't you dare invoke your mother." "Why not? She's the one who taught me that people matter more than money." "Your mother is dead." Jonathan slammed his hand on the table, making everyone jump. "She died bringing you into this world, and look what I got, a daughter who throws away every opportunity I've given her to play house with street trash." "Dad!" Rachel stood, shaking with fury. But it was James, 7-year-old James, who spoke next, his small voice cutting through the tension. "Our parents are dead too, sir. They died in a fire. And the man who was supposed to take care of us after, he hurt us. Really bad. Miss Rachel is the first person who's been kind to us in 2 years." The room went silent. Vincent Sterling leaned forward, eyes gleaming with something Rachel couldn't identify. Interest? Calculation? Jonathan's expression didn't soften. "I'm sorry for your loss, boy, but that doesn't make this—" He gestured dismissively at their little group. "A family." Rachel felt something break inside her. "You're right, Dad. We're not a family, because family doesn't look at children who've survived hell and call them street trash." She stood, gathering the boys. "Come on," We're leaving. Sit down. Jonathan's voice was a whip crack. We're not finished. Yes, we are. Rachel Ann Freeborn, if you walk out that door, you walk out on everything. Your trust fund, your place in this family, your future. Rachel paused, hand on Francis's shoulder. The trust fund was $5 million, her inheritance from her mother. Money that could change everything for these boys. College, security, a real future. How much? She asked quietly. Jonathan pulled out his checkbook, scrawled something, slid it across the table. $5 million. Right now. All you have to do is return these boys to the proper authorities and stop this insanity. Rachel looked at the check. More money than she'd ever see in her lifetime. Then she looked at James, still trembling from confronting a powerful man to defend her. At Philip, who'd started sleeping through the night without nightmares. At John, who'd told her last week that she was his hero. At Francis, who'd whispered, "I love you, Miss Rachel," 3 nights ago when he thought she was asleep. She picked up the check. For a moment, Jonathan looked triumphant. Then Rachel tore it in half. In quarters. Let the pieces flutter to the expensive carpet like snow. They're not these boys, Dad. They're Francis, John, Philip, and James. They're children who needed love, and I chose to give it to them. And I'd make that choice every single day for the rest of my life. Jonathan stood, his face purple with rage. Then you've made your choice. You're no daughter of mine. Good, Rachel said, surprised by how calm she felt. Because I'd rather be their mother than your daughter. She turned to leave. Boys clustered around her. You'll regret this, Jonathan shouted. When you're drowning in poverty, when these boys abandon you like everyone else, when you're old and alone, you'll remember this moment. Francis turned back, his young face set with determination. Sir, Miss Rachel chose us when no one else would. We'll never forget that, and we'll never abandon her. That's a promise. Outside, in Rachel's beat-up Honda, the boys were silent until they pulled away from the mansion. Then, James started crying. I'm sorry, Miss Rachel. We made you lose all that money. Rachel pulled over, turned to face them. All 4 boys had tears streaming down their faces. Listen to me, she said fiercely. There isn't enough money in the world to make me regret choosing you. You hear me? Not 5 million, not 50 million. You are worth more than all of it combined. But you gave up everything, John whispered. No, baby. I gave up nothing and gained everything. Rachel pulled them into a hug, all 4 boys crowding around her in the front seat. You're my family now. And family doesn't have a price tag. Philip looked up at her with wonder. You really mean that? With my whole heart. Francis, always the protector, wiped his eyes. Then we make you a promise, Miss Rachel. Someday we're going to make you proud. We're going to become something. And when we do, we'll pay you back for everything you've sacrificed. You already make me proud, Rachel whispered, kissing his forehead. Every single day. What Rachel didn't know. Back at the mansion, Vincent Sterling approached Jonathan, who stood at the window, watching Rachel's taillights disappear. That was unfortunate, Vincent said smoothly. Your daughter is quite stubborn. She's humiliated this family for the last time. Jonathan's voice was hollow, poisoned with grief and rage. Vincent's eyes gleamed. Perhaps I can help with that. You see, Jonathan, I've been doing some creative accounting with the company books. Nothing you'd notice, but enough that if someone started looking closely. He let the implication hang. What are you saying? Your daughter works in social services. She has access to charitable foundations, including yours. If someone were to frame her for embezzlement, for example, she'd lose credibility. Those boys would be taken away. Problem solved. Jonathan stared at him. You're talking about destroying my daughter's life. I'm talking about teaching her a lesson, making her understand consequences. Vincent's smile was poison. Don't you want her to regret choosing those boys over you? Jonathan looked at the torn check pieces still scattered on his carpet. Thought of his wife, dead these 16 years, leaving him with a daughter who looked exactly like her. Every time he saw Rachel, he saw what he'd lost. And tonight, watching her choose those boys, those white boys over her own blood, something inside him had shattered completely. Do whatever it takes, Jonathan said quietly. Make her understand what she's thrown away. Vincent smiled. Consider it done. Year 1. Rachel's apartment was too small for 5 people, but somehow they made it work. Francis slept on the couch. John and Philip shared a sleeping bag on the floor. James curled up in Rachel's bed, still waking with nightmares 3 times a night, whispering, "Don't let them find us," into the darkness. "I'm right here, baby," Rachel would whisper back, holding him until the shaking stopped. "You're safe. I promise you're safe." Money was impossible. Rachel worked 40 hours at the community center, then picked up night shifts, cleaning office buildings. She'd come home at 2 a.m., exhausted, to find Francis still awake, always keeping watch, this 13-year-old boy who'd appointed himself protector. "You should be sleeping," she'd say gently. "So should you, Miss Rachel." They'd sit together in the dark kitchen, sharing whatever leftovers she'd brought home, and Francis would tell her about the boy's day. How Philip had aced his math test. How John had checked out 6 books from the library. How James had drawn another picture of their family, always with Rachel in the center, always with everyone smiling. "You're doing an amazing job with them," Rachel would say. Francis's eyes would fill. "You're the one doing the amazing job. You work yourself to death for us." "For us," Rachel would correct. "We're a family, Francis. That means we take care of each other." One night, Francis broke down completely. "I'm so scared, Miss Rachel. What if Eddie finds us? What if they take us away from you? What if—" Rachel pulled him close. This boy trying so hard to be a man. "Then we fight. Together. But baby, you don't have to carry this alone anymore. That's what I'm here for." "I love you," Francis whispered. "I know I'm not supposed to say it because you're not really our mum, but—" "Say it," Rachel whispered back, tears streaming. "Say it any time you want, because I love you too, all of you, more than anything." Year 2. The foster certification came through. 4 boys officially placed with Rachel Freeborn, single black woman, living in a 1-bedroom apartment in the poorest part of Chicago. The social worker had been skeptical. "Miss Freeborn, are you sure you can handle 4 boys on your salary?" Rachel looked at Francis, 14, who'd just been accepted to a magnet high school on academic scholarship. At John, 12, volunteering at the free clinic, already dreaming of becoming a doctor. At Philip, 10, winning math competitions against kids twice his age. At James, 8, whose nightmares had finally stopped, who finally smiled without fear in his eyes. "We're already a family," Rachel said simply. "I'm just making it official." That night, she gathered them around their tiny kitchen table, the same table where they did homework, ate meals, played board games, told stories. "Boys, I need to tell you something." 4 faces looked up, instantly worried. "As of today, you're officially my foster sons," which means she didn't get to finish. James launched himself at her, John and Philip followed, and Francis wrapped his long arms around all of them. They stood there, crying and laughing, a tangle of arms and hearts. "Does this mean Eddie can't take us back?" James asked, his small voice muffled against Rachel's shoulder. "Nobody's taking you anywhere," Rachel promised. "You're mine now. All of you." Philip looked up at her, his serious little face so earnest. "Can we call you Mum?" Rachel's heart shattered and rebuilt itself in the same moment. "I would be honored if you called me Mum." "Mum," James whispered, testing the word. Then louder, "Mum, Mum." Francis, trying not to cry, whispered it too. "Mum." Rachel held them all. These 4 boys who'd been strangers 8 months ago, who were now the entire center of her universe. She didn't notice Margaret Hayes watching from across the street taking photos. Didn't know those photos were being delivered to Vincent Sterling, who was building a file, collecting evidence, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Year 3. John brought home a permission slip for a school trip to the Science Museum. Cost $40 per student. Rachel looked at her bank account. $23 until payday in 5 days. "It's okay, Mum," John said quickly, seeing her face. "I don't need to go." But Rachel saw the longing in his eyes. 12 years old, brilliant, hungry for knowledge, and she couldn't even afford a museum trip. That night, she took an extra cleaning shift. Then another. By the time the trip rolled around, she'd earned the $40 and had exactly $3 left for groceries. They ate rice and beans for a week. Nobody complained. When John came home from the museum, his eyes were shining. "Mom, they had this exhibit on the human heart, and I understood all of it. The doctor there said I asked the smartest questions he'd ever heard from a kid." He hugged her tight. "Thank you for letting me go. I know it was hard. Baby, seeing you light up like this, worth every penny." Francis, overhearing, pulled his brothers aside that night. Rachel heard them whispering in the dark. "We need to do better in school. Get scholarships. Make sure Mom doesn't have to work so hard. We need to make her proud," Philip added. "We need to become something," John agreed, "so we can take care of her the way she takes care of us." James, now 8, said softly, "We need to love her as much as she loves us." Rachel stood outside their door, crying silently, her heart so full it hurt. Year 4. Francis was accepted to Northwestern University on a full academic scholarship, pre-law. The acceptance letter arrived on a Tuesday. Francis stood in the kitchen, hands shaking, reading it over and over. "Mom," he whispered. "Mom, I got in. Full ride, everything covered." Rachel screamed, actually screamed with joy. The boys came running, and when they saw the letter, they all started screaming too. The neighbors probably thought someone was being murdered. Instead, a dream was being born. "I'm going to be a lawyer," Francis said, tears streaming down his 17-year-old face. "I'm going to be a prosecutor. I'm going to put away people like Eddie, people who hurt kids." Rachel cupped his face in her hands. "Your mum would be so proud of you. I'm so proud of you." "You're my mum," Francis said fiercely. "You're the only mum that matters. And someday, Mum, I swear I'm going to pay you back for everything. The sacrifices, the love, all of it. Baby, you don't owe me anything." "Yes, I do. We all do. And we're going to spend the rest of our lives making sure you never regret choosing us." Year 5. Rachel was promoted to senior caseworker, $38,000 a year. It felt like a fortune. They moved to a 3-bedroom apartment. The boys had their own rooms for the first time in their lives. John, 15, was accepted to a prestigious pre-med summer program. Philip, 13, won the state math championship. James, 11, had his artwork displayed in a city gallery. Francis, 18, was thriving at Northwestern, top of his class. At James's art show, Rachel stood in front of his centerpiece, a painting of 5 people around a kitchen table, holding hands. The title, "The Family That Love Built." "That's us, Mom," James said shyly. "That's our family." Rachel pulled him close. "It's perfect, baby. Just perfect." What she didn't see. In the corner of the gallery, Margaret Hayes stood with her phone, photographing everything. Later that night, she'd send the photos to Vincent Sterling with a message. "Rachel Freeborn's boys are thriving. She's becoming prominent in the social work community. She started asking questions about the Freeborn Foundation's accounting. We need to move soon." Vincent forwarded the message to Jonathan with one line. "Your daughter is about to expose my embezzlement. Time to activate our plan, unless you've changed your mind about making her pay." Jonathan stared at the photos of Rachel surrounded by 4 boys, now young men, all of them looking at her like she'd hung the moon. His daughter had built a beautiful life from nothing, had raised 4 successful boys with only love and determination, had proven that family wasn't about blood or money or matching skin. She'd proven everything he believed was wrong, and he hated her for it. "Do it," he texted back. "Destroy her." But on that night, in that art gallery, Rachel knew none of this. She only knew that 5 years ago she'd made a choice to love 4 scared boys more than she loved comfort or wealth or her father's approval. And looking at them now, Francis the future lawyer, John the future doctor, Philip the math genius, James the artist, she knew she'd make that choice again, 1,000 times again, even if it cost her everything. 15 years later. Kolme. 47. The pounding on Rachel's door was different this time. Not desperate children seeking refuge, not neighbors asking for help. This was authoritative, aggressive, the kind of pounding that shatters sleep and splinters wood. "Police, open up!" Rachel jolted awake in her modest 2-bedroom apartment, better than the old place, but still humble. At 37, she'd built a quiet life. Senior director at the Community Advocacy Center. The boys were grown now, scattered across the country, building the futures she'd helped them dream. Francis, 28, was a federal prosecutor in New York. John, 26, had just completed his surgical residency in Boston. Philip, 24, worked as a financial analyst in Washington, D.C. James, 22, was an investigative journalist for a major newspaper. They called every Sunday, visited when they could, sent money she never asked for and always tried to refuse. Her boys, her pride, her heart. Rachel Freeborn, open this door now. Rachel stumbled to the door in her bathrobe, hands shaking. Through the peephole she saw 6 officers with guns drawn. Guns. "I'm opening it," she called out, fingers fumbling with the lock. "I'm opening." The door burst open before she could finish, slamming her backward. Officers flooded in, weapons pointed at her chest. "Hands where we can see them." "What's happening?" "What did I—" "Rachel Freeborn, you're under arrest for embezzlement, fraud, conspiracy, and first-degree murder." The world tilted. "What? No, there's some mistake. I haven't—" Cold metal bit into her wrists, handcuffs. She was being handcuffed in her own home. "You have the right to remain silent." "Murder! They'd said murder." "Who?" Rachel whispered. "Who am I supposed to have murdered?" "Thomas Crawford, your father's business partner. We found him beaten to death in a warehouse 3 days ago. Your fingerprints were on the murder weapon." "I don't even know who Thomas Crawford is. I haven't seen my father in 20 years. "Save it for your lawyer." They walked her out in handcuffs, in her bathrobe, at 4 in the morning. Mrs. Okonkwo from next door stood in her doorway, hand over her mouth in horror. "Mrs. Okonkwo, please call my boys. Tell Francis. Let's go." The officer pulled her toward the squad car. Rachel twisted back. "Tell them I didn't do this. Tell them I love them." Mrs. Okonkwo was already reaching for her phone, tears streaming down her face. At the police station, they showed her the evidence. It was devastating, meticulous, impossible. Her fingerprints on financial documents authorizing the transfer of $50 million from Freeborn Enterprises to offshore accounts. Accounts that, according to the bank statements spread before her, were in her name. "I've never seen these documents, never opened these accounts. I don't have access to my father's company." "Really? Because we have security footage of you entering Freeborn Tower on 17 different occasions over the past 6 months. They showed her the footage. A woman who looked exactly like her walking through the lobby. Same height, same build, same face. But it wasn't her. I've never been there. Not once, in 20 years. "And Thomas Crawford?" The detective slid a crime scene photo across the table. Rachel's stomach lurched. "A man beaten brutally, lying in a pool of blood. We found your fingerprints on the pipe used to kill him, your DNA under his fingernails. Your car was spotted near the warehouse the night he died. I don't own a car. I take the bus. The 2015 Honda Civic, registered in your name, says otherwise. This was impossible, all of it. I want to call my son, Francis Morrison. He's a federal prosecutor. Your son? The detective raised an eyebrow. Those 4 white boys you fostered 20 years ago? Miss Freeborn, those boys left you? Social services removed them from your care 15 years ago for neglect. There's no record of any contact since. Rachel's world stopped. What? No, that's not true. They call me every Sunday. They visit, Ma'am, I have the court records right here. The boys were removed from your custody and placed in separate homes. You were deemed an unfit guardian. That's a lie. Rachel lunged forward. That's a goddamn lie. My boys... Officers restrained her. But the seed of doubt had been planted. She hadn't actually seen the boys in 6 months. They'd all been too busy, they said. Work commitments, travel. They'd promised to visit soon. Had they been pulling away? Had she been too blind to see it? No. No, they love me. They wouldn't abandon me. I want a lawyer, Rachel whispered. The arraignment was a nightmare. Public defender overworked, underprepared, barely looked at her file. Bail set at $5, million impossible. Rachel was remanded to county jail pending trial. In the holding cell, she finally got to make a phone call. Her hands shook as she dialed Francis's number. It rang, and rang, and rang. Voicemail. Francis, baby, it's Mom. I'm in trouble, really bad trouble. They're saying I killed someone, that I stole money, that you boys were taken from me 15 years ago. None of it's true. I need you. Please, baby. I need all of you. Call me back. I love. The recording cut off. She tried John. Voicemail. Philip. Voicemail. James. Voicemail. Rachel sank to the floor of the cell, phone clutched in her hand. They'll call back. They're just busy. They'll call back. But days passed. Then weeks. No calls. No visits. No messages. Rachel's public defender was pessimistic. Miss Freeborn, the evidence is overwhelming. The prosecution is offering a deal, 25 to life, if you plead guilty. If you go to trial and lose, you're looking at death penalty. I didn't do this. Then we need witnesses, character references, someone to testify on your behalf. My boys. Ma'am, I've tried contacting them. Francis Morrison's office says he has no comment. The others won't return calls. I'm sorry, but it appears they've distanced themselves. Rachel felt something inside her shatter. 20 years. She'd raised them for 20 years, sacrificed everything, loved them unconditionally. And now, when she needed them most. No, there has to be an explanation. The trial was swift and brutal. The prosecution painted Rachel as a bitter woman who'd never forgiven her father for cutting her off. A woman who'd spent 20 years plotting revenge. Who'd stolen $50 million and murdered the business partner who discovered the theft. She's not the saint she pretends to be, the prosecutor declared. She's a cold, calculating killer who used foster children as props to build a false reputation. Rachel sat at the defendant's table, watching her life be dismantled piece by piece. Her father Jonathan sat in the gallery. She caught his eye once, just once, and saw nothing. No recognition, no sympathy, no love. He looked at her like she was already dead. Vincent Sterling testified against her. I suspected Rachel was embezzling, but I hoped I was wrong. When I confided my suspicions to Thomas Crawford, he promised to investigate. 2 days later, he was murdered. Margaret Hayes testified too, crying. I tried to be a grandmother figure to Rachel after her mother died, but she was always troubled, angry. She blamed her father for everything. All lies. All perfect, coordinated lies. And through it all, 4 empty seats remained in the gallery, reserved for sons who never came. The guilty verdict came after 2 hours of deliberation. Guilty on all counts. Rachel gripped the table, the world spinning. I hereby sentence you to death by lethal injection. Death. She was going to die for crimes she didn't commit. As the bailiff approached with handcuffs, Rachel looked one last time at those 4 empty seats. Francis, John, Philip, James, the boys she'd loved more than her own life. The boys who'd promised to never abandon her. Where are you? The courtroom doors burst open. Wait! Rachel's heart stopped. 4 men in expensive suits strode down the aisle, tall, confident, powerful. She squinted through her tears. No, it can't be. The lead man's voice rang out. Your Honor, we're her sons, and we have evidence that will change everything. Rachel's hand flew to her mouth. Francis. Her Francis. Behind him, John, Philip, James. They'd come. Her boys had come. Francis turned, and their eyes met across the courtroom. Hey, Mum, he said softly, his voice breaking. Sorry we're late. And Rachel, who'd been so strong through 20 years of struggle, through arrest and trial and conviction, finally broke down completely. Because her boys hadn't abandoned her. They'd been preparing to save her. Judge Harrison leaned forward, his 30 years of courtroom experience unable to hide his shock. Mr. Morrison, you have 10 minutes to convince me why I should delay this execution. Francis stepped to the center of the courtroom, and Rachel saw it. The scared 13-year-old boy was gone, replaced by a federal prosecutor who'd spent 15 years preparing for this exact moment. Your Honor, we don't need 10 minutes. Francis's voice was steady, but Rachel heard the tremor underneath. We need 5. 5 minutes to prove that my mother, his voice broke on the word, has been the victim of a conspiracy that reaches into this very courtroom. He nodded to Philip, who approached with a laptop. My brother Philip is a forensic financial analyst. For the past 18 months, he's traced every single dollar allegedly stolen from Freeborn Enterprises. Philip connected his laptop to the courtroom's display system. Numbers flooded the screen: accounts, transactions, dates. The $50 million allegedly embezzled wasn't stolen from Freeborn Enterprises, Philip said, his quiet voice somehow commanding the room. It was stolen from Rachel Freeborn's trust fund, the inheritance from her late mother that her father illegally froze 20 years ago. Murmurs rippled through the gallery. Philip's fingers flew across the keyboard. These transactions, highlighted in red, began 8 years ago. 3 years before Rachel allegedly had any involvement. The money was siphoned through 17 shell corporations, all registered to one man. The screen showed a name, Vincent Sterling. The courtroom exploded. Order! Judge Harrison slammed his gavel. Rachel's eyes found Vincent in the gallery. His face had gone white. That's speculation, the prosecutor stammered. Your Honor, this evidence wasn't presented at trial, because it was deliberately hidden. Francis cut in, which brings us to our second piece of evidence. John stepped forward, medical charts in hand. Your Honor, I'm Dr. John Martinez, trauma surgeon. I've analyzed the autopsy report of Thomas Crawford, the man my mother allegedly murdered. He projected the autopsy photos onto the screen. Rachel looked away, but John's voice drew her back. The body identified as Thomas Crawford had AB negative blood. Thomas Crawford's medical records show he was O positive. John pulled out more documents. Bone density analysis indicates this body belonged to a man 73 years old. Crawford was 58 when he supposedly died. Most damning, dental records. The body had extensive fillings in molars that Crawford's dental x-rays, he projected them side by side, show were never treated. This isn't Thomas Crawford's body. This is a John Doe corpse purchased from a corrupt morgue official. The prosecutor was on her feet. Your Honor, this is outrageous. Are you suggesting— I'm not suggesting anything, John said calmly. I'm stating medical fact. Thomas Crawford is alive, and we can prove it. James stepped forward with a tablet. Your Honor, I'm an investigative journalist. 6 months ago, I tracked Thomas Crawford to Grand Cayman Island. He tapped the screen. A video call connected. A man appeared late 50s, tan, very much alive. The courtroom gasped. State your name for the record, James said. Thomas Crawford. The man's voice shook. I'm the man Rachel Freeborn allegedly murdered, and I'm here to confess that I faked my death. Judge Harrison gripped his bench. Mr. Crawford, are you testifying under oath? Yes, Your Honor. Vincent Sterling paid me $2 million to disappear. He said, Crawford's voice cracked, he said Jonathan Freeborn wanted his daughter destroyed, that she was about to expose Vincent's embezzlement and they needed her neutralized. Rachel's head snapped toward her father. Jonathan sat frozen, his face ashen. Vincent purchased a corpse, planted evidence, and paid me to vanish. I took the money because I was a coward. But I can't, Crawford broke down. I can't let an innocent woman die for my sins. The prosecutor looked like she'd been struck. Your Honor, I had no knowledge. We know, Francis said, because Vincent Sterling ensured the investigation was corrupted from the beginning. Which brings us to our final witness. The courtroom doors opened. Margaret Hayes entered, elderly and trembling, supported by a bailiff. Rachel's breath caught. Margaret, who'd raised her after her mother died. Margaret, who'd testified against her at trial. Margaret? Rachel whispered. The old woman's eyes filled with tears. I'm so sorry, baby. I'm so sorry. Francis helped her to the witness stand. Miss Hayes, please tell the court your role in this conspiracy. Margaret's hands shook. Vincent Sterling blackmailed me. 25 years ago, I embezzled $30,000 from Jonathan to pay for my daughter's cancer treatment. Vincent discovered it and threatened to expose me unless I helped frame Rachel. She pulled documents from her purse with trembling hands. I planted evidence, falsified records, gave Vincent Rachel's passwords, her schedule, access to her apartment. She sobbed, I betrayed the girl I raised like my own daughter because I was afraid. Rachel felt tears streaming down her face. But I kept copies, Margaret continued. Every forged document, every piece of planted evidence, every communication with Vincent. Because I couldn't, her voice broke completely. I couldn't let you die, Rachel. I couldn't let it go that far. She handed the folders to Francis. It's all here. Every crime, every lie, every person involved in destroying an innocent woman's life. Francis took the evidence with shaking hands, then did something that stunned the courtroom. He walked to Margaret and hugged her. You did the right thing, he whispered. You saved our mother's life. Margaret collapsed against him, sobbing. Judge Harrison studied the evidence in silence. The courtroom held its breath. Finally he spoke. In 30 years on this bench, I have never witnessed anything like this. Miss Prosecutor, do you have any response? The prosecutor stood, visibly shaken. Your Honor, I prosecuted this case in good faith, based on evidence provided. I had no knowledge of any conspiracy. If this evidence is authentic, it's authentic, Francis said. And there's more. We have audio recordings, surveillance footage, witness testimony, everything needed to not only exonerate my mother, but to prosecute everyone involved. He pulled out a small recording device. This was recovered from Margaret Hayes's personal files. It's a conversation between Vincent Sterling and Jonathan Freeborn, recorded 3 weeks before Thomas Crawford's supposed murder. He pressed play. Vincent's voice filled the courtroom. She's getting too close to the books, Jonathan. Rachel's asking questions about the Foundation's accounting. We need to eliminate the threat. Jonathan's voice cold, bitter. Do whatever it takes. She embarrassed this family 20 years ago. She chose those boys over me. Let her rot. Vincent, I'll frame her for everything. The embezzlement, the murder. She'll be on death row before she knows what hit her. Jonathan, good. She deserves it. The recording ended. Silence crashed through the courtroom like a physical force. Rachel turned to look at her father. Jonathan sat with his head in his hands, shoulders shaking. "Federal marshals," Judge Harrison's voice cut through the silence. "Arrest Vincent Sterling on charges of conspiracy to commit murder, embezzlement, fraud, and obstruction of justice." Marshals moved toward Vincent, who suddenly stood, pulling a weapon from his jacket. "Nobody move," he grabbed the prosecutor, pressing the gun to her head. "You think this is over? Jonathan Freeborn wanted his daughter dead, and I gave him what he wanted." The courtroom erupted in screams. "Vincent, don't!" Francis stepped forward, hands raised. "Stay back, all of you!" Vincent backed toward the exit, prosecutor held hostage. "You 4 boys should have stayed gone, should have forgotten about her." James spoke quietly. "We could never forget the woman who saved our lives. That's something a man like you will never understand." "Philip now," Francis said calmly. Philip's fingers flew across his keyboard. The courtroom security system engaged, doors locked, emergency protocols activated. Vincent was trapped. "You can't hold me. I'll kill her. The side door burst open. SWAT team flooded in, weapons trained. "Drop the weapon." For a moment, Vincent's finger tightened on the trigger. Then Francis spoke, his voice carrying across the chaos. "It's over, Vincent. You lost. Mom won. We won. Because love is always stronger than hate." Vincent's hand wavered. The prosecutor twisted free. SWAT tackled him to the ground. As they cuffed him, Vincent screamed, "She deserved it. She chose those boys over her own blood. She deserved everything she got." Rachel stood, her voice ringing clear. "And I'd choose them again, every single time." The courtroom erupted in applause. Judge Harrison slammed his gavel. "Order! Miss Freeborn, based on this evidence, I am immediately overturning your conviction and ordering your release. All charges dismissed." Rachel's knees buckled. Francis caught her. "We got you, Mom," he whispered. "We got you." John, Philip, and James surrounded them, all 5 of them holding each other, crying, finally together after 15 years of hell. But across the courtroom, Jonathan Freeborn stood, his face grey, and walked toward the exit. "Dad!" Rachel called out. He stopped, but didn't turn. "Dad, please." Jonathan's shoulders shook. Then he left, disappearing into the crowd. Rachel watched him go, her heart breaking even in her moment of victory. Because she'd been saved. But her father was still lost. 3 hours after the courtroom, Jonathan Freeborn sat alone in his penthouse, overlooking Lake Michigan, a bottle of bourbon on the table, and his life in pieces around him. On the television, news coverage played on repeat. "Wrongly convicted woman freed after sons prove innocence." Rachel's face filled the screen, exhausted, tearful, surrounded by 4 men who looked at her like she'd hung the moon. His daughter, the daughter he'd tried to kill. Jonathan's hands shook as he poured another drink. The alcohol didn't help. Nothing helped. Because every time he closed his eyes, he saw it. Rachel at 6 years old, crying at her mother's funeral. "Daddy, why did Mummy leave us?" Rachel at 16, bringing home straight A's, desperate for his approval. "Dad, I got into every college I applied to. Aren't you proud?" Rachel at 22, standing in this very room, choosing 4 homeless boys over $5 million. "They're children who need love. That's what Mum would have done." And his response? "You're no daughter of mine." 20 years of bitterness. 20 years of letting grief poison him into something monstrous. 20 years of telling himself Rachel had taken his wife from him by being born. When the truth was simpler and more devastating, he'd been a coward who couldn't face his own pain, so he'd transferred it onto an innocent child. His phone buzzed. Margaret Hayes. He didn't answer. It buzzed again. His attorney. Again, he let it ring. Then a text from an unknown number. "Mr. Freeborn, this is Francis Morrison. We need to talk about my mother. Please. Jonathan stared at the message. Francis, the oldest boy, the one who'd stood in this penthouse 20 years ago and promised, "We'll never abandon her." They'd kept that promise, while Jonathan had broken every promise he'd ever made to his own daughter. He opened his desk drawer. Inside lay a photograph he hadn't looked at in 16 years, his wife, Lorraine, holding newborn Rachel in the hospital. Lorraine was smiling, exhausted, radiant. "She has your eyes," Lorraine had whispered. "Promise me you'll protect her. Promise me you'll teach her to be kind, to help people, to choose love, even when it's hard." "I promise," Jonathan had said, kissing his wife's forehead. 3 hours later, Lorraine was dead, hemorrhage, sudden, irreversible, and Jonathan had blamed the tiny baby in the incubator, had looked at his daughter and seen only what he'd lost, never what he'd been given. "I'm so sorry, beloved," he whispered to the photograph. "I broke every promise. I destroyed our daughter. What kind of man does that?" The answer came in the form of his reflection in the window. A broken one, a bitter one. A man who'd let grief transform him into the kind of monster who conspired to execute his own child. Jonathan opened another drawer. Inside lay a bottle of pills. Sleeping medication. Enough to ensure he never woke up. He poured them into his palm. 30 small white tablets that would end the unbearable weight of what he'd done. This is better, he thought. Rachel is free. She has her boys. She doesn't need a father who tried to murder her. He raised the first pill to his lips. His phone rang. Rachel's number. Jonathan's hand froze. Why would she be calling him? After everything he'd done, why would she? He answered, his voice breaking. "Rachel? Dad." Her voice was quiet, exhausted. "Where are you?" "Home." "I'm at home." "Are you alone?" "Yes." Silence stretched between them, 20 years of pain compressed into seconds. "Dad, the boys tracked your location. They're worried. They saw the look on your face when you left the courtroom." Jonathan's eyes filled with tears. "They shouldn't worry about me. I don't deserve anyone's worry. Maybe not. But I'm coming over anyway. Don't," her voice caught, "don't do anything until I get there. Please." She knew. Somehow, she knew. "Rachel, you shouldn't. I tried to kill you. I conspired with Vincent to destroy your life. I sat in that courtroom and watched them sentence you to death, and I felt satisfied." His voice broke completely. "What kind of father does that?" "A broken one," Rachel said softly. "But you're still my father, and I'm coming. The boys are driving me. We'll be there in 20 minutes. "No, Rachel. I can't face you. I can't face them. What I did. 20 minutes, Dad, please. Just hold on for 20 minutes. The line went dead. Jonathan stared at the pills in his hand. He should take them now, before she arrived. Save her the burden of finding him. Save himself the agony of seeing the daughter he'd destroyed. But something in Rachel's voice, something underneath the exhaustion and pain, had sounded like her mother. Determined, stubborn, refusing to give up on broken things. "Promise me you'll protect her," Lorraine had whispered with her dying breath. Jonathan had failed that promise for 20 years. But maybe, just maybe, he could keep it for 20 minutes. He set the pills down. 18 minutes later, his doorbell rang. Jonathan walked to the door like a man approaching his own execution. When he opened it, Rachel stood there, flanked by her 4 sons. She looked small between them, fragile, a 42-year-old woman who'd just been freed from death row because her father had wanted her there. "Hi, Dad," she said quietly. Jonathan couldn't speak, couldn't move. Francis, the federal prosecutor, who could have had him arrested, spoke instead. "Mr. Freeborn, may we come in?" Jonathan stepped back, and they entered. The boys moved protectively around Rachel, but their eyes held something Jonathan didn't expect. Not hatred, not even anger. Pity. They sat in his living room, the same room where he'd disowned Rachel 20 years ago. The bottle of bourbon sat on the coffee table. The pills were visible on the desk. John, the doctor, saw them immediately. His jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Rachel followed his gaze. When she saw the pills, her face crumpled. "Oh, Dad, no. I couldn't live with it," Jonathan whispered. "With what I did. When I heard that recording played in court, my own voice, ordering your destruction, I realized I'd become the kind of monster I always swore I'd protect you from." He looked at her finally, really looked at her. "When your mother died, I blamed you. Every time I looked at you, I saw what I'd lost. You were supposed to be a gift, and I treated you like a curse." Tears streamed down his face. "When you chose those boys, it felt like you were choosing your mother over me, choosing her kindness, her compassion, everything about her that I couldn't access anymore because the grief was too big. So I let Vincent manipulate me. I let him use my bitterness to frame you for crimes you didn't commit. I told myself you deserved it, that you'd humiliated me, that you needed to learn consequences." His voice dropped to a broken whisper. "But the truth is simpler. I wanted to punish you for being alive when your mother was dead, and that makes me a murderer. Not legally, maybe, but morally." The room was silent, except for Jonathan's ragged breathing. Then Rachel stood. Jonathan braced himself for her rage, her condemnation, the judgment he deserved. Instead, she walked to the desk, picked up the bottle of pills, and threw them in the trash. "No," she said firmly. Jonathan stared at her. "Rachel, you can't possibly—" "I can't possibly what? Forgive you?" Rachel's eyes blazed. "You're right. I can't. Not yet. Maybe not for years. What you did was unforgivable." She sat beside him, and Jonathan saw the little girl who used to crawl into his lap after nightmares. "But Mom told me something before she died. I was only 6, but I remember every word." Rachel's voice softened. "Love is a choice you make every day, especially when it's hard, especially when people don't deserve it. You don't deserve my forgiveness, Dad. You don't deserve my love. You tried to execute your own daughter." She took his hand, and Jonathan felt himself break completely. "But I'm choosing to give them anyway, because that's what Mom would have done. Because these 4 boys," she gestured to her sons, "taught me that family isn't about being perfect. It's about showing up, even when everything's broken." Jonathan sobbed, deep, wrenching sounds he hadn't made since Lorraine died. Rachel pulled him into her arms, and Jonathan clung to his daughter like a drowning man. "I'm so sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry, baby girl." "I know, Daddy, I know." The boys watched silently, tears on their own faces. Finally, James, the youngest, the artist, spoke. "Mr. Freeborn, you called us worthless 20 years ago. You mocked our mother for being childless because she chose to love us." Jonathan flinched, but James continued gently. "But she raised 4 men who became a prosecutor, a doctor, an analyst, and a journalist. Not because we had money or privilege, but because one woman showed us what unconditional love looks like." Philip added, "Your daughter was never childless, sir. She was the richest mother any of us could have asked for. John, she taught us that family isn't about blood or skin color or money. It's about choosing each other every single day." Frances finished. "And right now, she's choosing you, even after everything, because that's who she is. That's who she's always been." Jonathan looked at the 4 men, the boys he'd called street trash, and saw the truth. They were extraordinary, successful, powerful, everything his daughter had built from nothing but love, while he, with all his billions, had built nothing but bitterness and regret. "Can I?" Jonathan's voice broke. "Can I be part of this? Even after what I've done, can there be redemption for someone like me?" Rachel was quiet for a long moment. Then, "I don't know, Dad, but we can find out. Together. One day at a time." Jonathan nodded, unable to speak. Frances stood. "Mr. Freeborn, the DA is still deciding whether to charge you as an accessory to Vincent's crimes." Jonathan straightened. I'll accept whatever consequences. Mom's asked them not to press charges, Francis interrupted. She said you've suffered enough. Jonathan stared at Rachel. Why would you do that? Because Mum taught me that punishment doesn't heal anyone, Rachel said quietly. But redemption might. If you really want it. I do, Jonathan whispered. More than anything. Then prove it, Rachel said. Not with money or grand gestures. With time, with showing up, with becoming the father Mum believed you could be. Jonathan took his daughter's hand. I'll spend every day I have left trying to earn your forgiveness. Good, Rachel said, because I'm going to need help with something. Anything. I'm starting a foundation for struggling parents, for kids in foster care, for families the system has failed. She looked at him with her mother's eyes. I'm going to need funding, resources, and someone who knows how to run a large organization. Jonathan felt something crack open in his chest, something that felt like hope. I'm yours, he said. Whatever you need, however long it takes. Rachel smiled, small, fragile, but real. Then welcome to the family, Dad, the real one. And for the first time in 20 years, Jonathan Freeborn felt like he might actually deserve to be called father again. 6 months had passed since the courtroom. Rachel stood in the unfinished lobby of what would become the Second Chances Foundation, a massive building in downtown Chicago that her father had purchased and was renovating with his own money. Mom, the contractor needs you to sign off on the daycare center blueprints. Philip called from across the room, tablet in hand. Mom. The word still sent warmth through her chest every time she heard it. Rachel walked over, hard hat on her head, reviewing the plans. Around her, construction workers transformed what had been a cold corporate office building into something warm, hopeful, alive. The playroom needs to be bigger, she said, marking up the digital plans. And add windows here. Children need natural light. Already noted, Philip smiled. Francis called. He's wrapping up a case in New York, but he'll be here for the ribbon cutting next month. And John? Flying in from Boston tomorrow. He's bringing his fiancée. Says he wants you to meet her before anyone else. Rachel's eyes filled. John, her gentle, brilliant John, was getting married, and he wanted her blessing first. James is already upstairs, Philip continued, setting up the media room for the interview tomorrow. Right, the interview. 60 Minutes wanted to do a feature on their story. The wrongly convicted woman, saved by the 4 boys she'd raised. Rachel had agreed on one condition, that her father be included. Speaking of which, where is he? Rachel asked. Philip pointed toward the back offices, where he always is, working. Rachel found Jonathan in what would become the foundation's administrative center, surrounded by legal documents and financial reports. At 72, her father looked older than his years. The stress of the past months had aged him. But there was something different in his face now. Peace, maybe. Or at least the beginning of it. Dad, you're supposed to be resting. Doctor's orders. Jonathan looked up, and Rachel saw the exhaustion in his eyes. 6 months ago, after his suicide attempt, they'd discovered the truth. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer. He had maybe a year left. 2, if he was lucky. I'll rest when this is finished, he said, gesturing to the paperwork. I need to ensure the foundation is fully funded, that when I'm gone, you'll have everything you need to help families like... His voice caught, like the one you built. Rachel sat beside him. Dad, you've already done enough. You've donated your entire company, the estate, everything. It's not enough. It will never be enough to make up for what I did. This was the dance they'd done for 6 months. Jonathan punishing himself, Rachel trying to show him grace, both of them navigating the impossible terrain between destruction and redemption. Dad, look at me. Jonathan turned, and Rachel saw tears in his eyes. You can't earn forgiveness, she said gently. I keep telling you that. It's not about the money or the foundation or the grand gestures. Then what is it about? Jonathan's voice broke. How do I live with what I did to you? Rachel was quiet for a long moment. This was the question he asked at least once a week, and she still didn't have a perfect answer. You live with it by showing up, she finally said. By being here. By letting me see you try to be better, even when it's hard. Even when you fail. I don't deserve that grace. No one deserves grace, Dad. That's what makes it grace. Jonathan reached for her hand, tentative, still afraid she'd pull away. She didn't. Your mother would be ashamed of me, he whispered. Maybe, Rachel admitted, but she'd also see you trying, and she'd see me choosing to forgive, and I hope that would make her proud of both of us. A knock on the door interrupted them. James stood there with his camera. Sorry to interrupt, but the lighting's perfect right now. Can we do some preliminary shots for tomorrow's interview? Rachel looked at her father. You ready for this? Jonathan's hands trembled. To tell the world what I did? To admit that I tried to have my own daughter executed? To tell the world that you're human, Rachel corrected. That you made terrible choices because you were drowning in grief, and that healing is possible, even from the worst things. Jonathan stood slowly. If you think it will help other families, then yes, I'm ready. In the main lobby, James set up his equipment while the others gathered. John had arrived early. His fiancée, Melissa, beside him, a pediatric oncologist he'd met during residency. She looked at Rachel with open admiration. Dr. Martinez has told me so much about you, Melissa said warmly, about how you saved him and his brothers. I didn't save anyone, Rachel said, embarrassed. I just love them. That's what saving looks like, Francis said, arriving with his briefcase. Still in his prosecutor's suit, he hugged Rachel tight. Hey, Mom. Miss me? Always. The five of them stood together, Rachel and her four boys. Now Men and Rachel felt the familiar, overwhelming love that had sustained her through everything. Okay, family, James called out. I want to do something before the official interview tomorrow. Just for us. He positioned them in the unfinished lobby. Rachel in the center, the four boys around her, Jonathan standing slightly apart, uncertain of his place. Dad, Rachel called. Come here. Rachel, I don't think. Dad, please. Slowly Jonathan joined them. Rachel took his hand, and the boys made room for him in their circle. James set the camera timer and rushed to join them. The flash captured the moment. One black woman, four white sons, one elderly white father, standing in the ruins of what would become something beautiful. A family that shouldn't exist according to biology or logic or any conventional measure. A family built entirely on choice. Want to see it? James asked, showing them the photo on his camera screen. Rachel stared at the image. They looked tired, battle-worn, imperfect, but they looked like family. It's perfect, she whispered. That night, after everyone had left, Rachel found her father standing alone in the future children's reading room. Can't sleep? She asked. Jonathan turned. I keep thinking about the courtroom, about the moment they said, death by lethal injection, about what would have happened if the boys hadn't. His voice broke. I would have killed you, Rachel. My bitterness would have murdered my own child. Rachel stood beside him, looking out at the Chicago skyline. But they did come. And I'm here. And you're here. And we're standing in a building that's going to help hundreds of families. Does it balance out? Jonathan asked desperately. Can good deeds balance out something that evil? I don't know, Dad. I'm not God. Rachel turned to him. But I know this. Every day you choose to show up, to do the work, to be better that matters. Not because it erases what you did, but because it shows you're not that person anymore. How do you do it? Jonathan whispered. How do you forgive me? Rachel smiled sadly. The same way those four boys forgave me for all the times I couldn't afford what they needed. For the Christmases, with dollar store gifts. For the nights, they went to bed hungry because I'd worked a double shift and was too exhausted to cook. They were children, They understood you were doing your best. And you were a man drowning in grief, Rachel said quietly. A man who lost the love of his life and didn't know how to survive it. I'm not excusing what you did, Dad, but I'm choosing to see the whole picture. The man who destroyed me, yes, but also the man who's spending his last year on Earth trying to build something good from the ashes. Jonathan pulled her into a hug, the first real embrace they'd shared in over 20 years. I love you, he whispered into her hair. I should have said it every day. I should have been the father your mother wanted me to be. Then be him now, Rachel whispered back, for whatever time we have left. They stood there in the unfinished building, father and daughter, finally finding their way back to each other. The next morning, during the official interview, the reporter asked the question everyone wanted answered. Rachel, how do you forgive a man who tried to have you executed? Rachel looked at her father, sitting beside her, hands trembling in his lap. I forgive him, she said slowly. The same way I hope God forgives all of us. Not because we deserve it, not because we've earned it, but because holding on to hatred destroys us more than it destroys the people who hurt us. She took her father's hand. My father made a terrible choice out of terrible pain, but he's making different choices now, and I'm choosing to witness that transformation instead of being trapped by the past. The reporter turned to Jonathan. Mr. Freeborn, what would you say to other parents who've let grief or bitterness damage their relationships with their children? Jonathan's voice shook. I'd say that every day you waste in bitterness is a day you'll never get back. I lost 20 years with my daughter because I couldn't see past my own pain. Now I have maybe a year left, and I'm spending every moment trying to learn what she's known all along, which is that love is a choice, and it's never too late to start choosing it. The interview ended with James's photograph projected on screen, the imperfect, beautiful family standing in their foundation. The reporter's final question, what do you hope this foundation accomplishes? Rachel smiled. Looking at her 4 boys, her father, the building rising around them, I hope it shows people that family isn't about perfection. It's about persistence, about showing up, even when everything's broken, about choosing love, especially when it costs everything. Francis added, and that sometimes the families we choose become more powerful than the families we're born into. John, that grace is real, even when it seems impossible. Philip, that redemption is always possible, if you're willing to do the work. James finished. And that love, real, unconditional, sacrificial love, can transform even the darkest situations into something beautiful. Jonathan looked at his daughter, tears streaming. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, love gives you a second chance you don't deserve. And a daughter who's strong enough to offer it. Rachel squeezed his hand. Welcome to the family, Dad. The real one. 2 years later. Grand opening day. Rachel stood at the podium in the main hall of the Second Chances Foundation, looking out at hundreds of faces, former foster children, single parents, social workers, families who'd been failed by the system and given a second chance here. Behind her, a massive banner read, The Lorraine Freeborn Second Chances Foundation, where love builds family. Her mother's name, her father's final gift. Rachel's hands trembled as she gripped the microphone. In the front row sat her 4 sons, Francis, 30, John, 28, Philip, 26, and James, 24. Each successful in their own right. Each here because 22 years ago, a poor young woman had chosen love over wealth. Beside them sat an empty chair, a single white rose laid across it. For the father who hadn't lived to see this day. 2 years ago, Rachel began, her voice catching, I was on death row for crimes I didn't commit, convicted of murdering a man who wasn't dead, accused of stealing from the father who disowned me, abandoned by everyone except 4 boys I'd raised from nothing. She looked at her sons, and they smiled back. Francis, with his prosecutor's confidence, John with his surgeon's calm, Philip with his analyst's quiet strength, James with his journalist's observant eyes. Those 4 boys became men who saved my life, not just by proving my innocence, but by showing the world what real family looks like. A tear slid down her cheek. But there's another person who made this foundation possible. Someone who spent the last year of his life trying to atone for 20 years of bitterness. She gestured to the empty chair. My father, Jonathan Freeborn, died 6 months ago, and before he died, he did something that changed everything. Flashback. 1 year earlier. Jonathan in a hospital bed, gaunt from cancer. Rachel holding his hand. I've signed everything over, he whispered. The company, the estate, all of it. Every penny I have goes to the foundation, to helping families like the one you built. Rachel's tears fell onto their joined hands. Dad, you don't have to. Yes, I do, because I can't undo what I did. But maybe I can help prevent other fathers from making the same mistakes. His voice broke. Maybe some good can come from all this pain. The boys stood around the bed, all 4 of them, keeping vigil. Mr. Freeborn, Francis said quietly, you called us worthless once. Street trash. You said we'd abandon Rachel when she needed us most. Jonathan closed his eyes in shame. I was wrong about everything. Yes, you were, Francis continued. But you're also the reason we have this chance to help thousands of children. Your redemption is going to save lives, sir. That matters. Jonathan looked at each of them. Take care of her. When I'm gone, promise me. We don't need to promise, John said gently. We were always going to take care of her. She's our mother. Jonathan's eyes filled. Then I'm dying a richer man than I ever lived. Back to present. My father wasn't perfect. Rachel continued to the gathered crowd. He made terrible choices out of terrible grief. He nearly destroyed the best thing in his life, our relationship, because he couldn't see past his own pain. But in his final year, he chose differently. He chose accountability. He chose redemption. He chose love. She picked up the white rose from the empty chair. And because of that choice, this foundation exists. A place where broken families can heal, where children who feel invisible can be seen, where parents who are struggling can find support, where love gets a second chance. The crowd rose in applause, but Rachel held up her hand. But this isn't about me or my father. It's about every family here who survived the impossible, every parent who's working 3 jobs to feed their children, every child who's been told they're not worth loving, every person who's been failed by a system that should have protected them. Her voice strengthened. You are why this foundation exists. You are why 4 homeless boys knocked on my door 22 years ago. You are why my father spent his last breaths trying to make amends. Because every person deserves a family. And family isn't about blood or money or perfection. She looked at her sons. Family is about showing up, about choosing each other every single day, about loving people, especially when it costs everything. Francis stood and joined her at the podium. Then John, then Philip, then James. 5 people who had no biological connection standing together as the truest family Rachel had ever known. 2 decades ago, Francis said, his prosecutor's voice carrying across the room, a 22-year-old woman with almost nothing opened her door to 4 scared boys with less than nothing. She fed us, clothed us, loved us. Not because we deserved it, but because she chose to. She gave up a $5 million inheritance for us, John continued. Worked herself to exhaustion for us. Went to death row for us, though not by choice that time. Light laughter rippled through the crowd. And she taught us that love isn't about what you have, Philip added. It's about what you give, even when you have nothing left to give. Especially then, James finished. Because that's when it matters most. Rachel pulled them all close. These are my sons, Not because I gave birth to them, but because I chose them, and they chose me back, again and again and again. She turned back to the crowd. That's what this foundation offers. The choice to build family through love, to create belonging where there was abandonment, to transform pain into purpose. My father's last words to me were, "Tell them love wins. Please, baby girl, tell them love wins." Rachel's voice broke. So I'm telling you, love wins, not easily, not quickly, not without sacrifice and pain and impossible choices, but it wins. It won when I chose 4 homeless boys over wealth. It won when those boys became men who saved my life. It won when my father chose redemption over resignation. And it's winning here, today, in this building, with every family we help piece back together. She held up the white rose. Dad, I hope you can see this. I hope you know that your brokenness became part of something beautiful, that your last year mattered more than all the years before. And I hope Mom is proud of both of us, for finally learning what she tried to teach us all along. Rachel placed the rose back on the chair, then turned to address the crowd one final time. This foundation is now open to every broken family, every struggling parent, every child who needs to know they matter. We're here, we see you, and we're choosing to love you back to wholeness. Because that's what family does. Later that evening, after the crowds had left, Rachel sat in what had been Jonathan's office, now hers. On the desk sat 3 photographs. 1. Rachel at 22 with 4 young boys, all of them grinning despite having nothing. 2. The courtroom photo, the moment her sons burst through the doors to save her. 3. The family photo from 6 months ago, Rachel, her 4 sons, and Jonathan standing together in this very building. A family that shouldn't have existed, built on sacrifice and choice and love that refused to quit. Francis knocked gently. "Mom, we're heading to dinner. You coming?" "Where are we going?" "That little diner on 5th Street, the one where we used to go when I was in high school and you'd just gotten paid." Rachel smiled. They could afford 5-star restaurants now. Francis was a prominent federal prosecutor. John was head of pediatric surgery. Philip ran his own financial firm. James had won a Pulitzer. But they still chose the little diner where a struggling mother had treated her boys to pancakes on paydays. Because family wasn't about what you could afford, it was about what you remembered, what you honored, what you chose. "I'm coming," Rachel said, standing. As they walked out together, mother and 4 sons, Rachel paused at the foundation's entrance. Above the door, engraved in stone, were her mother's words. "Love is a choice you make every day, especially when it's hard. Especially when people don't deserve it, because that's when it matters most." Rachel Freeborn. Rachel touched the words gently. "We did it, Mum," she whispered. "We chose love, and it was worth everything." James slipped his arm around her shoulders. "She knows, Mum. I think she's always known." Together, they walked into the Chicago evening, an imperfect, beautiful, chosen family. Proof that love doesn't just save lives, it transforms them. The Rachel Freeborn Second Chances Foundation has helped over 2,000 families in its first 2 years. Francis Morrison recently prosecuted the largest child trafficking ring in federal history, putting 47 predators behind bars. He credits his mother with teaching him that protecting children is the highest calling. Dr. John Martinez established a free clinic for underprivileged children, providing health care to those who can't afford it. Every child he treats, he sees the scared boy his mother once saved. Philip Thompson uses his financial expertise to help nonprofits and struggling families manage their resources. He's exposed 12 major charity fraud schemes, ensuring donations reach those who need them. James Wilson's documentary, Death Row Mom, a story of love and injustice, won the Academy Award and sparked nationwide foster care reform. He continues to investigate wrongful convictions, Rachel Freeborn runs the foundation full-time, speaking internationally about the power of chosen family. When asked what she's most proud of, she always gives the same answer: 4 scared boys who became extraordinary men. Not because of what I gave them, but because of what they gave me: a family worth dying for, and a reason worth living for. Margaret Hayes volunteers at the foundation 3 days a week, finding redemption in service. She and Rachel have reconciled, proving that even betrayal can be healed by grace. Vincent Sterling is serving life without parole. He has never shown remorse. Jonathan Freeborn's final words, recorded by James hours before his death: "I spent 60 years building an empire of money. My daughter spent 20 years building an empire of love. Only one of those empires will last forever." Rachel, if you're watching this, you were right. About everything. Your mother would be so proud. And so am I. Finally, truly, I am so proud to call you my daughter. The family photo on Rachel's desk: 1 black woman, 4 white sons, 1 elderly white father, all smiling. Caption in Rachel's handwriting: "The family that love built, worth more than any inheritance, worth everything." What does family mean to you? Is it the one you were born into, or the one you've chosen? Drop a comment below and share your story, because every family built on love deserves to be celebrated. And if this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to hear that it's never too late for redemption, forgiveness, or second chances. Because love always wins, always.
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you love this story, you will surely enjoy the next one. It's crazier and more intriguing than you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.